Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos The Brief. It's our weekly show about politics. I am Marcos Molitzis with my co-host, Kerry Alavelt. Welcome back.
Yeah, here I am. I'm ready to go.
Here you are. We're going to have a guest from Media Matters to talk about Fox News and stuff. That's been postponed because of unforeseen circumstances. We're going to talk to them in a week or two. But that's okay because, Kerry, we have a lot to catch up on, you and me. You've been gone for 4 weeks.
This is gonna be like Marcos and Kerry, like raw, like uncut. We're just gonna go for it. So I hope everybody's strap that seatbelt on, man. Here we go.
So you picked a really good time to go on vacation because it was kind of dead. Not much happened.
Yeah, you remember the last time we signed off for the new year and we were like, I bet you by the time we come back, Joe Manchin's still going to be holding up, Build Back Better and blah, 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 blah. And we basically predicted everything that was going to be happening a month later.
Yeah.
Not this time.
No.
Not this time.
So we didn't have the largest land war in Europe since World War II on a bingo card. Didn't have that.
Nope.
Maybe we could have foreseen a Supreme Court nomination and hearings, but I definitely didn't have a bunch of conservative yahoos driving around in a circle around Washington, D.C. in their semis, crying about teenagers flipping them the bird. That was high comedy. And Kerry, you may have missed it, but they decided that the entire Ukraine invasion was a plot by the deep state to take away media attention from them.
Oh my God, how did I miss that story?
Because the deep state nailed it.
They're so good. They're so good.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, plunged the world into, on the precipice of a nuclear Armageddon. So a bunch of yahoos who had to pee in a bottle and complained about it on their live feed.
Could spend their life savings of $13,000.
So you did pay attention.
Yeah, I saw that on Daily Kos because that's my main news source.
So here's the thing, Kerry. Okay, when I go on vacation, I'm doing it next week. First time in a while. It's weird because I try to unplug from the Daily Kos Slack, and I'm not in the news cycle. So I start consuming media not the way a regular American does, because regular Americans not like what's going on in The Economist today, but it's a more generalized way of approaching the news, right? It's not so acutely plugged in. It's a little more disambiguated. I don't know, making up words. So you've just had a month where you weren't plugged into the Daily Kos Borg. You were literally excluded from the Daily Kos Slack so that you would not, accidentally work during your time off.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Woo! Well, I just want to tell people. So I had elective surgery. Not to share TMI, right? Not too much TMI here. I'm fine. But I'm freezing now. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So and that means that on the night that Russia started invading Ukraine, which was Wednesday the 24th. I went into surgery on Wednesday the 23rd. I went into surgery on Thursday the 24th, very early in the morning. So my last headline was basically the shelling has started, right? And then I was high on hydrocodone for 3 days. Your pain meds, to try and ease the pain. Again, I'm well, and this was elective, but it's just an annoying thing I had to get done. So anyway, but then all of a sudden we're in a full-scale war. I mean, I was like, okay, I'm coming down off these meds. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't look good. So anyway,
just ask for more meds.
Right, just to give you a sense. I mean, I was trying to get off them early because they're highly addictive. You don't want to be on them. And I was like, as soon as I can tolerate the pain, I'm going to get off these things. And then I was like, this is a shit show. I mean, and at first incredibly inspiring on the UK, on the in terms of Ukraine, the civilians, the just brave stand that they have taken, but then just crushing, knowing that, of course, Vladimir Putin was going to end up just bombing the heck, and that really doesn't do it justice, but bombing the heck out of the entire country wherever he could, especially the more he started to lose ground, the worse of a strategic debacle it was. And by the way, anyone who hasn't listened to some of Marcos's dispatches, I mean, first of all, what I noticed was Marcos and Mark Sumner have been doing some of the best coverage, of anyone in terms of strategically where things stand. Of course, there are we're thankful to have very brave reporters on the ground there who have brought home some of the human element of what's happened in Ukraine. But when I listened to your episode, your podcast with John Stoltz, right, of Vote Vets, and I can't remember who your other
Brendan
guest.
Friedman.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't as familiar with him. That was by far the best explanation I'd ever heard on any outlet anywhere of why this had gone so wrong and so far south so quickly for Russia. And, at that point, mainstream journalists were still asking Ukrainians, well, how long are you going to be able to hold out? And you guys were already predicting this is just a big loser, a big clusterfuck, for Putin, no matter which way he slices it now. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be incredibly painful. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be heart-wrenching to watch, but this is going to be this is already a disaster for him. So anyway,
I just want to it wasn't even a prediction. I mean, we're seeing what's happening on the ground, and the traditional media has done a really good job on the human interest aspect of the story, the refugees, the human toll, that part of thing. They've been great being on the ground. That's a story that's relatively easy to tell. The story of what's happening militarily, none of these media people have military experience. When they go to the generals on CNN, the generals are looking at sort of the maps, the units, right? They don't actually have experience, the kind of experience that I did and John Stoltz did and Brendan Friedman did, of actually serving in a unit and dealing with the logistical reality of on the ground, right? Like being the grunt on the ground is a different view than being a general back in the Pentagon. It's sort of the difference. The person working the Amazon warehouse has a very different view of Amazon than Jeff Bezos.
Sure.
Jeff
Bezos. Yeah, we know who you mean.
and so it's a different perspective and one that sort of understands the realities on the ground. So yeah, I'm very proud of the coverage that we've done at Daily Kos, and that episode was great. And our episode last week with Mark Sumner actually is at over 100,000 listens, which is now our most popular episode. So it seems that people appreciate that deeper understanding of the strategic and tactical view of the war in Ukraine, as opposed to how many refugees have come out and what the situation in the refugee camps is and the toll on civilians that are being bombed. Important stories to tell. I do not want to minimize that in the least, but it's not the full story. And missing that part of the story is the reason that you had CNN for weeks talking about Russia is 20 kilometers from this downtown Kyiv, and acting like, oh my God, the hordes are coming. When we just look at the map and go, like, they literally haven't moved in 2 weeks. Yeah. So what are you hyperventilating about? The story's obvious. Right. And you don't have to be a tactical genius to realize that when nothing moves, that means stalemate. There's
something is wrong. Something is not going as planned.
Right.
I mean, they didn't plan to like sit outside of Kyiv for, 7, 14, 21 days and have pizza, like that's not, that's not what they were.
Not at all.
So, but listen, what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, you go. No. You have. Okay.
No, I was going to say that. Yeah. You go.
Jinx.
We're out of practice here. We gotta.
Yeah, we're out of sync. We're out of sync. Our logistics are terrible here. So, no, what I was going to say is, on a much bigger picture, right? For me, as I looked at what was happening, I was thinking, and again, I was not immersed in the details. I was very specifically picking certain things that I thought I could tolerate while I was, healing, literally. And I was realizing the extent to which this, this battle between Russia and Ukraine, or Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, this battle between authoritarian regime, Soviet style authoritarian regime, and Western democracy was really crystallized. Now, I'm not saying anything that people haven't already thought of, I think, and especially progressives. But I think what was interesting and what is true is that it's crystallized for a lot of Americans this the fact that this battle is still going on. It's ongoing, and it's a giant, huge, continuing threat. And not just externally, but internally here in the United States. And I think progressives and Democrats throughout Trump's tenure have seen where the Republican Party has been headed, and have been warning and saying, look, this is an authoritarian party. They want fewer people to vote. They want to control the outcomes of the vote. They're fine being beholden to one person as long as that person, manages to secure power. They really don't seem that interested in a peaceful transfer of power. The episode of January 6th, the fact that they haven't wanted to, explore that, examine it, learn from it, make sure it doesn't happen again, instead of become denialists of it. All of these things are happening here at home. And it seems like, independents, certainly 30% of Republicans at the very least, and even some Trump Biden voters, suburban voters, people who are not sort of immersed in the details the way you are, the way I am most of the time. They haven't really grasped what this fight is about, what this existential fight for democracy is about. And I feel like, this horrific and gut-wrenching, war that we have seen play out in Ukraine has crystallized for Americans in a way, that threat that we haven't felt in a very real way, in some ways, since the end of World War II. I'm not saying there haven't been, instances of attacks and, people feeling vulnerable. But the existential threat in that sense, I think, and I'm certainly not downplaying 9/11 either, but the existential threat that the whole country feels, I feel like hasn't been brought home since World War II in the way that it has been brought home here. And I think, we got to win this battle in Ukraine, and we got to do what we can to help them, and hopefully find, and at the same time, de-escalate tensions there. But we got to win this battle at home too. And I don't want to be crass, and I don't want to dismiss what's happening abroad at all. But this is a fight here at home in the United States. It's an existential threat. One of our parties is no longer invested in democracy, and you can see what that yields with someone like Vladimir Putin. And I think you know this very well, as you've been in
absolutely.
the details.
What's funny is that I was actually going to prompt to exactly this topic when we were sitting or stepping all over each other, because one of the things that struck me this past month is this infighting in the Republican Party, because they don't know how to handle this issue of Ukraine. And I was like, oh, Kerry, because Kerry, for those who don't know, one of her beats is the sort of the crack up of the Republican Party, and it's bent towards authoritarianism and the rear guard, small government conservatives that are trying to like hold on to their party as it slips away. And so there was so much evidence of that over this past month. But there's no accident that Donald Trump was all excited when Putin invaded. I mean, He was, oh, that's so brilliant. That's amazing. He's so smart.
Genius. It's genius.
And a month later, just this weekend, he reiterated that it was genius, but it was a negotiation gone bad. Oh, it's just a mild, hiccup of a negotiation. He cannot let go because Putin is his role model. It's his ideal. If you look at Republicans, you have the fake Christianity, right? For all the ways that conservatives have vilified Islam, they mock it as a religion of peace because of extremist groups like ISIS. Here you have Putin literally using Christianity as a rationale for invading and destroying Ukraine. So you have this sort of religious ethno-fascism. You have the locking up media that they don't like and creating that media bubble, right? I mean, Republicans would love it if Fox News and AM talk radio was the whole game and everything else we see it. The suppression of protest, the wrong kind of protest, right? The way they treated Black Lives Matter protests and the resistance during the Trump years. The way they have bullied and this might is right approach to foreign policy where, well, we got the big army and we're the greatest nation on earth, so we can tell people what to do. The way Trump was bigfooting around Europe and had he won re-election, NATO would have been done. There was no NATO. The attempt to use others for his own political gain. I don't want it lost, and I'm afraid that it might get lost, but I don't want it lost that the first impeachment of Donald Trump was because he was extorting Zelensky over Javelin missiles, the same Javelin missiles that have basically stopped the Russian hordes. The same,
right.
Those were the missiles that Donald Trump was holding hostage unless Zelensky literally made up an investigation against Hunter Biden.
Which to this day, he is calling for now. He's begging Putin to release information on Hunter Biden. I mean, talk about the height of irrelevance. Donald Trump, reliving his glory days by asking Putin now, instead of Zelensky, obviously, but asking Putin to release information on Hunter Biden. I mean, that's been, sorry. So I interrupted you, but it's like, God, talk about someone who's grasping onto relevance. I mean, this whole thing has just left him behind. And he's still still trying to get dirt on Joe Biden. So anyway.
And then you throw in privatization, right? The big Republican, everything must be privatized. So I wrote a story this morning about the 4th Guard Tank Army. This is a storied Russian armored division. It pushed back the Nazis from Stalingrad in World War II. One of the most famous military units of any nation in history. And they came in the northeast axis of the country, and they pushed in, and they've gotten absolutely obliterated, We're talking a division with 230 tanks. It has lost at least 80 of them that we have seen visually pictures of. And that's just like the baseline. It's combat ineffective. It has literally been pushed back to Russia by Ukrainian forces that are, again, really want to stress, undergunned. I mean, they don't have the big tanks and the Air Force and the massive artillery that Russia has. They pushed out the most famous Russian division, pushed them back across the Russian border. Why do I bring this up? Because as I was researching and writing the story, which ran on Daily Kos today, Tuesday, I was digging into the leadership and the commander of the entire unit was dismissed, but one of the regiments, a commander, was committed death by suicide. And so dig into, whoa, what happened here? Probably because of his failures, right? No, it turns out is that they went in to look at their strategic stockpiles to replace those lost tanks, right? They're supposed to go in, and then there's all these older tanks they can pull out. And it turns out that only 1 in 10 were functional. Most of them had their engines removed. There was no maintenance, no care for them. And just like you leave a car in a garage for 20 years, it's not going to run if you try to pull it out. Military equipment's even more fragile, requires even more care. And so dug in a little further. So anyway, none of the equipment works. So the guy, died by suicide. But why was that equipment in such bad condition? It's because Russian government had privatized the maintenance of that equipment to some oligarch friend of Putin, of course. And he wasn't going to actually spend money maintaining equipment, because what war were they going to fight? I mean, they had enough equipment to go to Syria and their little wars. I mean, there was no intent to fight a major land war against a foe that actually would be able to attrit their main forces. So it just turns out that even that was a house of cards. So you have, on top of everything else, the being an authoritarian and squelching the press and squelching protest, and throw in privatization. And really, Russia is the Republican ideal. This is what they're fighting for, and this is why Trump can't quit.
Can't quit. Let me just add the accumulation of wealth at the top, the accumulation of all the money being with the 1%, and them just being able to get away with doing anything with impunity because there is no accountability. There's no elections. There's no real elections. There's just Putin yes men and where that gets them. I mean, it's astonishing to me that the supposed Secretary of Defense has never actually been in combat. Isn't that true? I mean, at Putin's Secretary of Defense.
There's a whole story about that, because they had a Secretary of Defense that was actually holding the oligarchs accountable for the quality of the equipment that they were shipping, and that couldn't stand. So he got ousted.
Get rid of him.
And Shoigu, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, the current Minister of Defense, has survived over 20 years in the Kremlin, precisely because he lets the oligarchs do whatever they want, including delivering substandard, non-functional equipment. Russia's supposed to have 3,500 aircraft in its air force, and yet they can only fly about 10 to 15 sorties a day over Ukraine. That math does not work in any rational sense, except that the entire Air Force was just one big grift, and it's a paper tiger, and they can't get it to fly, because if they could fly it, they would fly it. There's no strategic reason to hold back one of the greatest advantages in modern warfare, which is air superiority and air support for your ground forces. So it's but then now let's go back to the United States, and you have Trump can't quit them. Marjorie Taylor Greene can't quit them. Lauren Boebert can't quit them. Tucker Carlson is still apologizing for Putin. QAnon has become, for whatever reason, all they've gone all in on Putin, and their whole movement. So you have Mitch McConnell, like, he's a veteran of the Soviet Union's the evil empire, right? Like he's on the right side at this moment. His whole party is falling apart, though, because they're all falling towards this pro-Putin stance. And even today, Tuesday, you had a Republican in Congress, in the House, introduce legislation that would scrub clean the first impeachment against, because the call was perfect. I mean,
right.
You look at the call, and it was patently a shakedown for those Javelin missiles that had literally turned the tide of this war. And I don't want people to forget, because it seemed very Ukraine. Most people couldn't find Ukraine on the map, 2 years ago, right. And it seems so far away. And the details weren't complicated, but they were more complicated than an intern, giving a president a BJ, right? So it was. But now,
way to work that in there. Impressive. Sorry.
And this sort of kind of gets us into November, right? How can Democrats use Ukraine to relitigate not just Donald Trump's authoritarianism and his assault on Russia, but the Republican movements, conservative movements' continued support for Putin and Russian-style autocracy as a model for what their America looks like?
So I want to make just an addendum to something you said, which is, for the moment, Mitch McConnell's on the right side in terms of backing Ukraine, wanting U.S. to support Ukraine. But of course, what we know is, as soon as, Biden took as many actions as he possibly could and helped rally this whole effort to put, really severe economic sanctions on Russia, as soon as that happened, and gas started going up, then the Republicans were turned around and were like, oh, this isn't Putin's price hike. This is, at the pump, of course. This is Joe Biden's, right? And I just want to say, just for a second, let's step back. Who is responsible for enabling Putin to think that Ukraine was weak enough that he could just roll right over it? He could roll into it, take the capital city, and just, annex the entire country, right? Who in America, which party is most responsible? And I just want to say the Republicans spent 4 years just turning a blind eye to everything Donald Trump did, all his Putin praising, all his Putin bootlicking. And then they let Trump off the hook for impeachment when he tried to extort the Ukrainian president, right, in order to get dirt on Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, supposed dirt, right? Essentially extorting him so that he would manufacture, so that Zelensky would manufacture an investigation that was, totally bunk. And the Republicans let him off the hook for this in the first impeachment proceedings. And McConnell led that charge of letting Trump off the hook for that. So if anyone has weakened Ukraine and empowered Putin to do whatever he wants, the Republican Party has been right there lockstep. So if you want to call this Joe Biden's price hike, you might as well call it Republicans' price hike.
How much do you think McConnell regrets that?
I don't think he regrets anything. No. I don't. You know what I think Republicans have realized is that the average American's memory is just so short that they can't piece that together. And here's where Democrats must improve, right? I heard something, and I can't remember where I heard it, but this idea, the notion that Democrats really think that, the media is on their side because the media is typically fact-based, right? And that they will fact check Republicans, and then it will all come out, and this will become, and the truth will become illuminated for Americans. That is never going to happen for Americans, given the presence of Fox News, the constant beating of the drum, the constant flow of misinformation from Republicans. Democrats cannot depend on the press and see the press as their, as
they're not allies.
They're not allies.
Press is not allies. And the New York Times screwed us during the run-up to the Iraq War. They screwed us at the end of the 2016 election with the Comey email BS.
Right.
Press are not allies.
I think Democrats kind of find it unseemly to be connecting these dots and doing this work. And I also think they find it a little boring because, frankly, to just repeat the same 5 talking points over and over and over again for 2 years is not super intellectually stimulating.
I certainly are not going to do it. And I'm friendly. Right? I'm friendly media.
Right. So the point is, Democrats can no longer depend. They've got to they've got to pound these points home. They've got to connect the dots between Republicans and Putin and Trump and weakening Ukraine and what this is wrought for the world. And then suddenly they turn around, they're like, oh, we should be doing more. No, I didn't vote for, the budget bill that would have provided more money for Ukraine, but Biden should be doing more. I mean, that is it's such bullshit. But Americans are very distractible. And they're susceptible to this constant churn of just the same talking points and the same misinformation churned over and over again. And, if there was ever a time to expose the Republican Party for how unserious they are, at a moment in time when we have the potential for World War III, we're still combating a global pandemic that, could take millions more people across the globe, not to mention here at home in the United States. If there were ever a time to unmask the Republican Party for just how profoundly unserious it is in this serious moment in history, it is now for the Democrats and there for their taking.
Yeah, and this isn't too hard. So we're talking about gas prices, which I think is the number one plank of the Republican 2022 playbook. Is gas prices. Right now, the gas companies all have record profits. And it's not like, oh, it's just a percent or two. No, we're talking massive windfall records. The price of crude oil has been going down. The price of gasoline at the pump has not. been going down, they're pocketing that difference. And so it's really easy for Democrats. I don't understand why this isn't happening. Where you talk about, okay, we're gonna cut down, we're gonna eliminate the gas taxes, and then we're gonna make it up with a windfall tax on energy companies. Boom, you just shaved 30, 40 cents off a gallon of gas right off the bat. And you have the gas companies pay for it and make it indefinite. Make that indefinitely. And go above and beyond that. But there's a way to shift this is Joe Biden's gas tax or gas prices.
Right.
Shift that to the gas companies and make that relentless. Gas companies and Putin and war profiteers. There's plenty of that going around, and punish those people and dare Joe Manchin to vote against it. I don't even think Joe Manchin would vote against a windfall tax on gas companies. I could be wrong. He keeps surprising me, but I
don't think Joe Manchin knows what he won't vote no or what.
Yeah, the lobbyists
changes all the time. Yet. He was really excited about maybe re-upping some slimmer, trimmer form of Build Back Better, but today, nah. Not so much. We can't tax those billionaires that Biden just put in, the president just put into his budget. That's just a bridge too far for.
But there's been so much Republican defense of Putin. So, for example, Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, who's up for re-election, one of the most important Senate races this year in a 50-50 state, spent 2018 4th of July in Moscow, palling around with Putin and his friends. And there's a whole group, there's a whole gaggle of Republicans, no Democrats in that group, whole gaggle of Republicans. He's the one that is electorally relevant right now, and obviously a big target. There's a bunch in states that are just red states. But Republicans are palling around with Putin in Moscow on 4th of July. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism attached to this stuff that can really be weaponized against Republicans, and rightfully so. This isn't cheap shots. This is legitimate, given this record of the Republican Party really embracing Putin to the point where people, again, don't realize this. There was one change to the Republican platform in 2016. There was one change, and that was support for Zelensky and Ukraine, because Paul Manafort was Trump's campaign manager, and Paul Manafort was also a lobbyist for Russia, attempting to undermine Ukraine. Like, these connections didn't make a lot of sense, or they seemed disconnected to real life at the time. Suddenly, these connections make sense. And there's a way, even what I just said is a little complicated. Like, there's a way to sort of strip it to its essence, which is Republicans want Russian-style autocracy. This is what they are fighting for. Look at Russia today. This is what they're fighting for. And I'm not a messaging guru, so I'm not the one who's going to actually write the copy.
These ads, I mean, I feel like some of them write themselves. There were people praising Trump's praising Putin. There's questions asked of someone, what do you think of Trump saying this about Putin? And Senator X turns away and walks down the hall. I mean, that happened over and over and over again. It's not that hard. I mean, I'm not telling these campaigns exactly which campaign should do what, but some of these things are there for the taking. Undoubtedly there for the taking.
You are a student of polling, public opinion polling.
I'm like a novice student of polling. When you get into the deep math stuff, I'm like, whoa.
Well, no, we don't need to worry about the deep. That's why we have people who know deep math.
Yeah, right.
We're the guys who look at we look at the top line. Yeah. And maybe we look into some of the sub demos to see.
Right. I'll look at the
we're not going to do the actual math.
But if you're going to get into methodology, I'm going to be like, hold on a second.
So, what have you seen anything related to the war and its impact on, say, Joe Biden or the Democrats in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, just before I went out, Biden had done his State of the Union. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yes. And, he had gotten some bump from that. So there was for a bit, there was a question. He had gotten a bump in the polls. Now, not all the polling is in sync on this. So I'm going to rely on polling that I trust, that some people, some of our readers love to hate, which is civics polling, because when civics polling showed that, Trump was competitive, in 2020. And when civics polling showed that Trump's approval rating wasn't going down, people were very upset about that. Well, I mean, civics polling was right about those things, right? So this is civics polling. What I like about it is it doesn't jump around based on the State of the Union. Oh, there's a big jump and then, back down. Or there's, Afghanistan, the pull out of Afghanistan, there's a big drop and then, it goes back up and whatever. Civics polling, and what I like about it is that it's much more steady. And but because of whatever they do to it, right, it doesn't just jump around all the time, right? So when I see movement in civics, sometimes I see movement in other polling and I think, oh God, I hope that's true. Or, oh, I hope that's not true. But when I see civics polling move, I trust that something is happening. And that's the value of civics polling, is that it just doesn't it's not herky jerky all over the place.
Yeah.
Right?
And so everybody knows civics polls every single day. So it's an ongoing, sample. And the reason is, Kerry, public opinion just doesn't change that much.
No.
And when people,
it's not that fluid.
When people want to shoot the messenger, I always say, when was the last, so you're a Clinton supporter. Yeah. What would make you change to Trump? Well, nothing. Then what makes you think other people are different?
Right.
What makes you think that you're the special snowflake who is so dead set on your opinions, but nobody else is? Everybody else is malleable. We're not. As a species, we're not malleable. And marriage equality, which you are very well familiar with that whole battle, we're talking about a net 10, 15 shift in 10 years, in a decade. And that was considered a momentous shift in public opinion.
Momentous. People are still trying to figure out how that happened and what it takes to make that happen for other social issues.
And it was 1 to 2 points a year. I mean, but that's considered a momentous shift. So that's what civics sort of shows. And sometimes it's boring because you don't get the big dramatic.
You don't. You want that shift. You're like, oh, it was killer. There should be an uptick, and then
But there is. For Biden.
Yes. Okay. So let me hit the bad news first, because the good news is good, and I can go into a little bit more detail on it. The bad news is, I just looked. This is one thing that I looked at. It was easy for me to look at some polling while I was, healing, and not have that just crush my spirits. Even though the polling wasn't always great, the humanitarian disaster in Ukraine was just really overwhelming. So anyways, I looked at the polling regularly. Right now in the job approval ratings, okay, the bad news is that in civics, Joe Biden's job approval sits at 38%. Okay. If you look at the 538 aggregate, it's closer to around 42%, low 40s, right? So people don't like that because they're like, oh, it's low. But the truth of the matter is that I don't think we should be super worried about exact numbers right now as much as we are worried about trends. And when I left, Joe Biden had been on a steady, just before I left, Joe Biden had been on a steady downward trajectory on civics for months and months on end, with a few minor breaks, right? And, it might plateau for a second, but then it was going back down. Since then, what we have seen is that it started to rebound, right? And
at the State of the Union address,
right after the State of the Union address, it started to rebound. And I'm inclined to think that because that rebound on civics has continued, that he is getting, and there's another reason I think this, I'll tell you in a second. Joe Biden is getting credit for competent handling of this global response to Putin and his aggression, right? And this completely unprovoked war,
which has been objectively a great response.
Right, objectively a great response. So I think that that this has been a reminder for both Democrats, and if you look at the crosstabs in that civics tracking poll, you can see that for Democrats and independents, he's gotten a net plus gain of about 6 or 7 points since Russia invaded Ukraine. For both independents and Democrats. So I think for Democrats, some of them, it's really reminded them, oh my God, this is why we elected Joe Biden, right? Was for competent handling of the pandemic. Some people have, some people have different opinions of how competent that's been. It's no doubt that the rollout of the vaccine program was incredibly competent and swift. We just couldn't get everybody to to buy into it because the Republican Party was by and large telling people don't do it.
I mean, there's a chunk of people who are angry that they had to wear masks. I mean, that's what that really came down to. Because there was never a real vaccine mandate beyond healthcare workers. So it really comes down to having to wear masks on planes, and that's what they're all angry about.
Right. Yeah. So the other thing is that, I think it reminded independents why they voted for Joe Biden. And I don't just say this over Trump. Now, some of them are just Democratic leaning independents, but there are some actual swing voters, or maybe not even swing voters. They're Republicans who voted for Biden, even though they had voted for Trump in 2016. So these Trump Biden voters. And what was really interesting was I got kind of addicted to listening to Sarah Longwell, who we've had on as a guest here. She's a never Trumper. She's the publisher of The Bulwark. She's a Republican. She is, desperately hoping to try and save the Republican Party. But one of the inspired things she did as publisher of The Bulwark is start this podcast called The Focus Group. And I had a chance to listen to all of her, most recent episodes of the Focus Group. And one of the episodes focused on Ukraine. And she had, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman on to talk with her about what voters had to say. But the interesting thing about focus groups, polling kind of tells us what people think. And focus groups kind of give some insight into why they think it. I'll give you an example. One of the focus groups I listened to talked about Trump and the fact that some Republicans don't seem to be quite as hot on him running in 2024 as there's some that are really hot and some are saying he shouldn't do it. And you think, they're saying he shouldn't do it because they've had enough of him. What really came out in one of those focus groups was that a lot of Republicans are saying he shouldn't do it because he lost in 2020 and they don't think he can win again. So it's not that they really dislike Trump or that they really are moving away from him that much. It's that they think he's a loser.
It's a surprisingly cogent and smart take. Right. I mean, I'm not being.
They don't think he can win.
Disqualified.
Right. So anyway, that's the difference between what you get from polling and what you get from a focus group is sort of why people think things, right? In this focus group on Ukraine, they had Republicans, but they also had Trump Biden voters. They were separate. I think they were separate focus groups. But in any case, it was really interesting to listen to these Trump Biden voters, and several of them, and I'm sure they take a cut of the people who really reflect, who aren't outliers, who kind of reflect the general trend of what these voters are saying. And these Trump Biden voters who rejected Trump in 2020 and instead voted for Biden, even though they probably still lean Republican, said over and over, they were kind of saying, gosh, look at the situation in Ukraine. Like, can you imagine if Donald Trump was, we might have World War III right now because Donald Trump's just that crazy. I mean, maybe not, but you just don't know.
And you don't know what he would have done.
We don't know what he would have done. And then there's one saying, talking about Trump saying that Putin's genius and just saying how disgraceful that was, quote unquote, disgraceful. And it's just disdainful that he built Putin up for 4 years and now he feels this need to weigh in. And one of them, on this war, like he's not president anymore. He, basically this guy was just saying he should just shut up, right? He didn't say that, but that's essentially what he was saying. And then one of them said, it kind of makes me feel good now that I voted for Biden because this is the reason. So for these Trump Biden voters, it's actually a reinforcement for them that this is why, I don't know that they, some of them may have voted for Biden because they thought that, Trump was going to, doom us all in the pandemic, but they wanted someone who was at least reasonable and at least competent. And this handling, Joe Biden's handling of Ukraine is why they voted for him. So I think we have, to me and for my mind, I see this big picture crystallization of authoritarianism versus democracy. That being brought home to the American people as this stuff flashes across their screens, right? And then you have this polling that shows, and not all of it is consistent, but Civics polling is consistent where you see this, slow sort of, but sure uptick. I mean, it's real movement toward Biden as Ukraine continues to play out. I don't think at this point we can just say, oh, that's because he gave a good State of the Union speech. I don't believe that for a second. And, at the same
Not enough
time, you
people
have,
watch those. Yeah,
right.
it's a
And it's
speech.
same, and it was good. But, and then at the same time, then you have, this focus group that was really clear that it was reinforcing for people why they voted for Biden over Trump, even if they were Republicans or Republican leaners. And to me, I feel like this has put Biden and Democrats on better footing. I can't tell you whether or not they're going to be able to, to totally capitalize on this moment here. But I can tell you, as we always say, I'm not just trying to play politics here. This is as important. This upcoming election is as important to the global fight for democracy and freedom as anything that else is going on, including what's happening in Ukraine. We have to win here at home. We have to win there. We have to win everywhere.
So Biden's approval ratings are around 38% on Civics. And if you want, y'all can go civics.com, civics with a Q.com. And you can see by age, by sex, gender, by education status, by party. And it's fascinating stuff. And one of the things that is clear right now is that some of his lowest ratings are amongst Democratic-leaning young people. And so we've talked at length about the one issue that might turn that around, which is college debt relief. And I don't think they're going to have a choice, but this is not Biden has always been at near zero amongst Republicans. So it's not like you're going to make up or lose amongst Republicans. So it's been when you see Biden's numbers go down, it's because of Democrats that are unhappy that he hasn't delivered on their critical priority, and independents, which are, when people think independence means like in the middle of Democrat and Republican, but no, independent means Tea Party Republican who's like, I'm not a Republican, they're sellouts, I'm an independent. They're still conservative, they're most likely to vote Republican. And then you have like Bernie Sanders liberals who are like, the Democratic Party is sellouts, and so I'm an independent, but they're going to really vote Democratic, right? So independent, the true independents, I think Pew has really dug into it. It's about 5% of the electorate. It's enough to sway a lot of elections. I'm not going to discount it, but when people see independent, they think it's a sort of conglomerate in the middle of the parties. It's not. Just a tiny percentage of them are, but it's critical. And there is going to be a debate this fall that was going to be on Republican terms, which was high gas prices, critical race theory, scary black people want you to read books and make you feel bad about being white. And what else were they going to run on? Freedom, just random freedom, but like generic freedom. Go look at Ukraine, what freedom really, like a loss of freedom. Look at Russia, what a loss of freedom looks like. And then we'll talk about your silly freedom.
Right. You want to talk about cancel culture? Look at Russia.
Yeah, look at Russia. So that was going to be the battleground. And I'm sure Republicans are going to keep trying to work on those issues. But I think from a broad resonance, the issues that really will the battleground we can fight on electorally is that competence and foreign policy, which historically has been weak ground for Democrats. And if they can shore that up with Ukraine and Joe Biden's able handling of the war, I mean, you have Republicans going from, it was a perfect phone call to extort the Ukrainians out of getting American anti-tank Javelin missiles to, why aren't we putting a no-fly zone, which would be just as dangerous, if not more so, because it would essentially require the U.S. to start lobbing missiles into Russia. I mean, no-fly zones. you gotta destroy their anti-aircraft missiles to fly aircraft over Ukraine, right? So Joe Biden has really walked that line very ably. Not to mention how you released all that intelligence. This is unprecedented. Countries don't release that type of intelligence. Biden was basically telling Putin, I got ears in your room.
I mean, that was amazing.
What you're going to do.
Yeah, I know what you're going to do. Yeah.
It was so crazy. And that Europe was like, no, that can't be right.
Even to some extent, Ukraine was like, no, this isn't going to happen. That's crazy.
No, and Biden's like, we got ears. We know what's going on. And by the way, that's got to drive Putin crazy because even they're getting ready to do chemical weapons. And, Putin's like, all right, put them away, guys.
Right.
They're on to us. They know. And So he's managed this war, and he hasn't done it flashy. It's not like he's out there, with Commander Codpiece like George W. Bush with his mission accomplished banner, right? Like he's just calm and competent and giving the Ukrainians what they need, but not also giving into any cockamamie demand like a no-fly zone or give us. And we can get into why giving Ukraine planes is not a good idea, but it's not a good idea militarily. There's much better, bang for buck stuff. The missiles that they're sending suicide drones now, which beat the heck out of any airplane that they could possibly ever send at a fraction of the cost, and space too, because you can cram these little missiles into, a lot of them into a truck as opposed to a plane, which is just logistically very hard to maintain.
Is there anything that Biden could be doing that you wish he was?
Is there anything Biden could be doing?
Or do you think he's really got this balance?
He's nailing it. So if anything, I would like to see him work behind the scenes with some allies to really push for a nautical evacuation of Mariupol. Just have Turkey, and I know France and Turkey and Greece were talking about doing it, and things have gotten really quiet. But it would be great for them just to send ships and just dare Russia to do something about it, to evacuate. I would like to see. The U.S. can't do it. We cannot do it without risking a broader war, and that does not benefit anybody. So people don't realize, but the civilians. You have a broader war. You're going to have civilians in Poland dying. You're going to have civilians in the Baltic Seas, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, the Baltic states dying. You're going to have civilians in Romania and Bulgaria. I mean, this is not a question of like, we're going to get involved, but only Ukraine's going to feel the pain. This is about expanding the pain to all these border states, Finland and beyond. Like, we don't know where this goes. And that's assuming no nuclear weapons, which is not a good assumption to make, because Russian doctrine authorizes first strike of battlefield nuclear weapons if Russia is under threat. And it's very vague on purpose, because they're basically signaling, don't F with us.
There were those several days when the U.S. couldn't even couldn't even communicate with Russian commanders, after, like, I don't know what that's called. There's like a hotline between Russia and the U.S. in order to diffuse any misinformation. Right. It's a crisis link, right? To stave off an accidental, like, nuclear holocaust. I mean, that's
so I actually think Biden's handled it very well, and I think Democrats have handled it very well. I think they could have pushed for aid faster, but it's getting there now. It's all in the end, it's all worked out very well, and U.S. far and beyond providing the most weapons and equipment, and so I could say I wish they were sending some of this and some of that, but who knows? Maybe they are. Like, we actually don't know exactly what they're sending, and that's on purpose. Like, we don't need to know. We don't need to telegraph to Russia exactly what the allies are sending Ukraine, other than like, we're going to send a lot of missiles that are going to kill your planes and your helicopters and your tanks. So are you sure you want to keep, you want to keep this war going? That's okay to communicate, but specifics. And I'm even watching these major battles, and Ukraine's been very tight-lipped about how they're fighting those battles and winning those battles. And that's all on purpose. Like, we don't need to know. We don't need to know.
It can be studied later. When they hopefully when they win this thing, when they come out at the other side of this, I don't know in what form that's going to be, that it can be studied then.
There are drones above every battlefield, like multiple drones over every. So they know what happened, and someday we'll get to see it. But so there is that steady presence from the United States, and it's doing so in a way that's also not stepping on the Europeans. It's allowing the Europeans to take the lead on a lot of these issues, like Poland, because they're the ones that are directly affected. So again, it's not the Russian model. Russians, because they want to dominate their zone of influence. China wants to dominate their zone of influence. They can't imagine that the United States isn't calling the shots with NATO. But of course, U.S. can't get France and Germany to do whatever. Otherwise, Nord Stream 2 wouldn't even exist. It never would have been built if the U.S. was calling the shots. So it's all a great balancing act between both not starting a war with Russia, but also in giving Europeans a chance to lead on this, because they do need to lead. It's their backyard. It's their freedom that's directly impacted. It's not us. The United States is not impacted. So this
So
is
I think,
all.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I think we were going to wrap up. I think, believe it or not, we've managed to just bloviate our way through through like
We can
for
talk.
50 minutes, just like our guest dropped out and we're like, yeah, we'll just banter. Anyway, but we were going to bring it back to the midterms and
Yes.
what we think this presents for Democrats in the midterms. You were headed there.
Yeah, I was headed there. It changes the nature of the debate, and I hope Democrats take advantage of it, because if they want to yell tax prices or gas prices, then we can say, yeah, because of oil companies are gouging, and there needs to be a windfall tax, and Vladimir Putin, which, by the way, you guys supported for the last decade. Next, and just go down to and then they can sit there and scream about critical race theory. I think those issues, particularly issues of freedom, have really lost their teeth right now. I mean, they seem like so overwhelmingly important. And this is why that stupid freedom convoy lost its mojo immediately, because the second the war started, all their complaints seemed so petty and stupid by comparison.
So petty. And I got to tell you, the whole idea of critical race theory and the culture wars, that could, if Democrats, if certain candidates seize on this, it could backfire entirely. This whole idea of book bans. I mean, if you put this under the umbrella of authoritarianism versus democracy,
connecting
book bans are there's no greater example of autocracy and authoritarian regimes than book bans and clenching down on freedom of speech in that sense. So I mean, there's literally pictures from Germany and Hitler and these and Nazis burning books, photos.
It's amazing that they literally burn books. They literally burn books. You think it's a metaphor? It's not even a metaphor.
No, it really happened, and it's and what it leads to, and where Republicans are headed with that is scary. And you know what? Most suburban voters know that, and they've studied enough history to have some idea, some inkling that it's not right. And this is where you are seeing some suburbanites sort of start to push back on this whole idea of, we're going to just the books are just disappearing, they're just gone from the shelves, so, but so you can hit gas prices. We talked at length about that, but you can hit the culture wars, because I don't think they mean what Republicans meant them to mean before Ukraine happened. I think they mean something entirely different now if you give them enough context. And for God's sake, learn from Liz Cheney, not because we like her politics, we don't, but her messaging is brilliant. Her immediately tweeting out after the RNC, the Republican National Committee, voted and said that, that January 6th was legitimate political discourse, and her immediately tweeting out video of Trumpers beating on police and thrashing police and not tear gassing, bear spraying them and using flagpoles to beat them, crushing them in doors. That was not legitimate political discourse. And just recently, you remember, Marcos, there was that New York Times article, I think it was about a month and a half ago, that was right at the outset of the January 6th committee, Democrats weren't sure that they wanted to go down this legal path of whether or not Trump had committed crimes. They thought it might be a little too aggressive. And Cheney was adamant that they should take that path. And she pressed forward on that issue over and over again. And what did we get this week? A federal judge saying it's likely, now not beyond a reasonable doubt, but in his estimation, it's likely that Trump committed crimes. And he's basically, and it was over these issue of whether, the guy who laid out the legal theory for how Trump could steal the election, Dr. Eastman, whether he would have to turn over his documents and information to the January 6th committee. But that judge wrote this, and it is like a plea for the Justice Department to take up this issue if it's not already, and that's in serious question. But he wrote this: if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan worked, had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. It is just chilling to see that from a federal judge. And, the Justice Department has got to take that up, and Democrats have to take all of this stuff up.
And they got to run with it, because if Republicans win the House, it kills this committee. Right. So this is, and that's a new playing field. It's our democracy, January 6th. It's Roe v. Wade, because it's likely to be struck down. So that's going to be a big battleground. And it's the rising autocracy of the Republican Party and the love of Russian-style life, or governance, which is autocratic. It's suppressive, and it's dark. It really is dark.
So it's super dark.
That's a different campaign than critical race theory and random freedom. So Democrats need to make this shift. The ground is there. The material is there. That shift has to happen. I really do think Ukraine helps with that. Kerry, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're back. It's such a I've had some great guest hosts the last couple of weeks, but
you've really killed it. You've been great. So
excited that you are back on the saddle, and glad you're healthy, and we have a lot. This is going to be an interesting election. They all are in their own way, but wow. Yeah, we are watching history in a dramatic way unfolding, global history unfolding.
Yeah, global. People are going to study this period of time. People will study this period of time, and let's hope that the history that's told is something that we can be proud of.
So thanks to everybody that the brief, behind the scenes that works on the brief, Walter, Kara, and Dorothy. Thank you, the viewer,
Carolyn Fiddler.
Carolyn. Thank you, the viewer and the reader, for joining us every week, for joining us this week, and for being fellow travelers in this fight for our democracy. Wouldn't want to have anybody else by my side as we fight to win this November. So thank you so very much. Thanks for joining us this week, and catch you next week. Bye-bye.